if you put a job description out there and you get 1,000 resumes and you run it through an AI, how many good people did you lose because a human didn't take a look at it? So what are the decisions from a human in the loop in a HR perspective? And I think, your chief AI officer has to be actively involved in building those policies and procedures.
Hello and welcome to this episode of The Data Shift. I'm your host, Rajesh, CTO at Charter Global. And I'm really excited to welcome you all to one of the most critical conversations most of the enterprises are having, which is data and AI. In today's episode, we're going to dive into more details about data's readiness and how to expand it to your AI ML use cases. At The Data Shift, on every episode, we have top thought leaders join us, talk about these interesting conversations about enterprise strategy, technology, how can you really bring ROI on your business. And today we have joining us Mr. Nevarda Smith, CTO and Chief AI Officer of Mag Mutual. Nevarda is a phenomenal AI and data transformation leader. I'm very excited to have him here. Welcome to the show, Nevarda.
Thanks, Rajesh. Happy to be here and excited as well. Before we get started, I just want to outline that while I implement these strategies and execution methods at Mag Mutual, these are my personal opinions and they're not the opinions of Mag Mutual themselves.
Fantastic. Again, very, very excited to have you here. With that said, without ado, I'm going to warm up into some of my first set of questions here. Different organizations, different departments within an enterprise, they sit on their own data. They seldom talk to each other and hence create what we call as data silos. Would love to learn a little bit more about your perspective on data silos, how they're formed, what influence do they have on an enterprise?
Yeah, excellent question. Definitely a challenge that we have to face, putting strategy in place to deal with these things. But data silos can be thought of as maybe a filing cabinet that each part of the organization's got, and only that part of the organization has the key to their own data set. So what you end up with is a lot of fragmentation, a lot of individuals building models and accessing reports and making business decisions against data sets that might be old, that don't incorporate other parts of the organization. An example I always like to use is underwriting versus claims, right? So when you're doing underwriting, you need to understand the claims history, and not having a centralized location bring all that data together. It really puts up boundaries between the organization, and most importantly, you're making decisions that might not have the clarity of having all the data sets themselves. They also lead us to have in the development organization, we have to go out and get this data from many different locations. So you end up with, lead times being very excessive as we try to find data points that we need to put together to make decisions on. So expanded timelines on development and missed deadlines and things like that. And then governance becomes an absolute large challenge with the organization. How do you do data lineage? How do you understand where the data came from? How do you understand where those decisions are being made for transforming that data? And these all come together and really put up silos between the different parts of the organization. And lastly is security, right? Who's got access to that data set? How do you control those access points in highly regulatory environments such as insurance and financials? Certain parts of data are only supposed to be seen by certain individuals within the company, and you have to have a business need to see that data. And if you've got a filing cabinet of data that's available to everybody, you start violating some of those, things that come from the legal aspects of it, such as regulatory requirements.
No, that is very interesting, and thanks for sharing all that. It almost feels like those data silos are really the root cause of a lot of the struggles that we have on data, all the way touching from security, compliance, to making it a lot more difficult for upstream and downstream projects. We have seen this over and over at Charter, at the data practice at Charter. Every time we go actually evangelize, or every time we go actually discovery with our clients, this is probably one of the first things that we look at. How siloed is the data? That's what kind of gives us how messy the environment is or not. So spot on. Thanks for sharing that, and very, very interesting thoughts on sharing that. But yeah, that's probably one of the first things that we really look at when we actually go to any of our clients. With that said, in the data world, especially in the data architecture world, we always hear about this paradigm of your bronze, your silver, and gold data. It almost sounds like Olympics of the data world, what we classically call as medallion architecture. What's your view on medallion architecture? Why is this word so used in data architecture world, and what importance does it hold?
Yeah, so if we go back a little bit in history, obviously we used to have data warehouses, and you used to hear the terminology ETL, right, where the data was sourced, it was brought in, it was translated before it would hit the data warehouse. So medallion architecture with the bronze, silver, and gold layer tries to address those concerns, especially with the data lineage portion of that. So from a bronze layer, that allows us to bring in data in its current form. So whether that's internal data from existing operational systems, you bring that in as it is. You don't do any sort of transformation on it in that layer, and it really allows us to go ahead and pull external data sets, that are available, things like a definitive healthcare and, maybe some legal data sets that you need to bring in, and maybe some demographics and geographical information that needs to come in. And what you want to do is bring that all in its current form, and that way you set the standard that you have, okay, I know I had one for one at that point when I pulled that data set in. The silver layer is really where you start to standardize, and you take a look at all the different data sets, and you provide a layer that's going to be analytics ready. So this is the area where you would start to put reports on top of, right, and understand it. But all the transformations need to happen in that layer, all the standardization, the governance procedures that come in on top of that, so that you can actually trace that data back to the bronze layer and, the source layers that it came from. This kind of also helps you understand and put a box around how you're doing those transformations. And the champion of it all is really the gold layer. And this is where it needs to be artificial intelligence ready. This is where your models will live. This is where a lot of consumption upstream systems will happen. This is where your data scientists really get involved to build all the different models for predictive analysis and using the data sets to their full advantage. And if you kind of walk through those layers, you can see how this data evolves as it goes through each of these layers and becomes stronger and stronger for making decisions in the organization. So it's really a transformation on the old way we used to do stuff in data warehouses with no capability of traceability. Everything was written in code, and now it's separating out in these different layers with specific different purposes.
No, thanks for hitting on all those aspects of why bronze, silver, and gold is so important. And one very, very interesting aspect, if I were to add to it, is the beauty is we could stay tool agnostic, but the same set of principles and architecture does apply, and why it is so critical to understand what it means to have data at the bronze layer, at silver and gold. In most of my previous gigs, I've worked with some really large fintech organizations. All of those organizations, what I saw was the more purposed your data is, the better it is for your upstream and downstream upstream projects that you're talking about. Your gold layer, the more purpose it is, the more I think it is driven out of a purpose. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. The when you talk about the gold layer itself, that's where you have to tie that stuff, and hopefully we get to that a little bit later on. But that's where you need to be tying those things to the strategic initiatives that you've got at an organization, because there's going to be a lot of distractors that come in. Yeah, we can do these things with the data sets, but making sure it's back to the strategy and it's going to be useful.
That drives a fairly interesting conversation. So it almost feels like if at the goal layer, the purpose has to be defined. So are you kind of in a way suggesting that your business entities and your business within your enterprise needs to really understand what the purpose is and what those business cases and use cases are which are driving that purpose?
Yeah, I think as IT, we need to enable them to be able to do that. So that's asking the right questions and then doing a proper analysis on those use cases as they come in. And there's a couple of questions that I always ask at the start, which is, okay, what's the strategic unlock? And then what are the KPIs that we're going to utilize to measure the data quality and the outputs from the investment that we're making in that space? So, if you ask those two questions up front, of course, we've got a long list of other questions that we will ask to make sure that this is something that we can do, because some of those questions are going to drive, well, do we even have the data available, and is it going to be in the right form, or do we need to, establish that first, especially with external data sets. Often the business thinks, yeah, we can grab this data set from one of these vendors and they think it's in ready to consume format, but we have to do a lot of transformation on it and get it ready and bring it to a standard across the organization so it can be used not only by that department but other departments in the organization as well.
That is phenomenal. I think that's a really good take home for some of our audience here. As Nevarda and I are speaking here, as you can see, that goal layer, or what we call as a purpose, that could be your conversation of your IT or your technology teams to your business teams, right? It's a team effort, I feel, where you actually drive that purpose on the data. And the more you drive purpose on the data, the more you can actually utilize it for your downstream or upstream applications functionality, may it be data science use cases, like we're talking about today, which is your AI ML use cases. So really thanks for breaking that down into those three layers for me. In the data world, we often hear this fancy word called normalization. And everyone takes a step back and is like, why is this such a technical word? And for me, if I were to put it in layman's word, like, if I want to give an example to layman out there, for me, it's almost like literally organizing my pantry so that I can access whatever I want in the pantry very easily, right? Like we could literally put normalization in very simple terms like that. But what does normalization really mean to you? Why do people talk about normalization? I think you touched a little bit about it in the silver layer.
Sure.
But we would love to hear a little bit more. And also, how do you look at tooling when it comes to normalization?
Yeah, so normalization, a bit of history, used to mean taking a set of tables and standardizing those tables at that level. You used to hear the word, we've got to get it to third normal form. But in the new world, it's more of making sure that the data sets that you're using, because we're making better decisions on them today, especially with AI and machine learning models, right? So if you take a data set and that data set has wide skewed data, normalization helps you bring that data set down into standards, so that if you've got these outliers, the models that are going to be built on top of those, if you don't do normalization, is going to start skewing the results. So it might put different weights on different parts of the data set based on how it's distributed. So standardizing that, bringing that together and using some of the methodologies to standardize that data is so important. Of course, there's other aspects as well to enhance the interoperability of that data set. So once you put it into a normalized format, then you can utilize it for other models. Models can share data sets themselves as you start to take a look at your strategic plan and how you're going to be rolling out these different models. You want to break those things down so you can actually see the interoperability between those things, as to make sure that you're making the right decisions about what data should come next and what parts of that data are going to be used for other models to give you the biggest lift you can from the investments that you're making in those areas. Fair comparisons is important. We talk a lot about ethics and bias that comes out of data sets. The governance aspects of that are about making sure that we're making intelligent decisions, they're ethical. We're not skewing data in a direction because the data set's a little bit off. And then most importantly, are we asking the right questions? Just because we can do something, do we have an ethical framework in place to actually address what it is we're trying to do? Again, just because we're doing something doesn't mean we should always do it, right? In our area, we're also controlled by a lot of state and federal laws. And so we've got to be able to have explainability in there as well. So, transforming this data in this normalized way allows us to explain our data set. So in the event of an audit and someone's asking how these decisions are being made, we can provide that information to them with all, not only in the silver layer and in the gold layer, but we can talk about how this data moved throughout these layers and the decisions that were being made and the transformations that were happening in those spaces.
Very interesting. It's almost like you read my mind.
Yeah.
And I was just going to follow it up with a question on governance. And thanks for touching so much on governance. It's almost like you literally read what I was going to ask you. But thanks for doing that. Very interestingly, a couple things from my experience that if I were to bring in, what you touched upon on lineage, it's very important to have observational data, really know your observational data. But at the same time, unless you actually normalize the data, unless you have the data sitting in that one format, otherwise it just becomes operational overhead. There is no way you will be able to call data single source of truth if you don't have it in the normalized form, which you very rightly touched upon. There is no way I would be able to run my right analytics if the data is not in the normalized form, which means then my data is not single source of truth. And if my data is not single source of truth, everything which is actually driving downstream, which could be my analytics use cases, which could be my data science use cases, are all going to be corrupt. Yep. In a way, they will not really drive the results that my business and I would really want to see. So I guess that's why normalization is so important, and it's so used in today's data world.
Yeah, and even the decisions that are being made, right? If you can't tell that those decisions are incorrect, you're going to make changes or directional shifts in the organization that might not be correct. And like in regulatory environments, you have to be spot on as far as how those decisions are being made, and they have to be right.
No, spot on, right? Regulatory or otherwise, at the end of the day today, so many of our enterprise decisions, starting all the way from the ROI to everything, is so data driven. I can only imagine how confused the world would be if that source of truth is corrupted. So thank you so much for touching on both these aspects of governance and normalization for us now.
No problems.
This is amazing. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation with you, and how you're so easily putting these concepts out there. With that said, I'm sure a lot of our C-level audience is really curious about strategies. How do you strategize data, and how do you really strategize both on your data and AI? So I'm going to base the next segment a little bit on strategy questions. In our experiences, we have seen everything from a spreadsheet to really nice predictive models, right? You have seen enterprises all the way from these aspects. Now, according to you, what is a mature roadmap? How does it look like? Please help me with your perspective both on data and on the AI side of things. That'll really help our audience.
Yeah, so I really think that first of all, you've got to take a step back and you've got to put a strategy in place. So creating that AI and data strategy that's tightly coupled is so important, because again, you can't have an AI or an ML strategy without the data sets being in the right format. So picking a strategic framework that you can actually implement, that's going to also drive from that strategy level to the support from the upper management, the business users, that's going to drive that down to the execution that goes on in that space. So if you take a look at, the different aspects of what needs to go into that strategy, you need to do maturity assessments. You need to understand where these data sets are coming from. You mentioned Excel spreadsheets, right? Those things are still around today, and there's a lot of people call them models, but there's algorithms and there's math going on inside of those areas, and then people come in over the top of those spreadsheets and say it's not quite right, the information, so they're tweaking values within that, and that's all done out of people's heads. So our job as technologies is to try to get that information out of them in those decisions that they're making with those data sets, and pull them down into a data layer that we can do consumption in. So from a strategic perspective, if you don't have that framework that everything is following, then you're going to start to get, pockets of information or data sets coming outside of the, people are going to pull it from a different area. They're going to start running it in their spreadsheets, and then we're not going to get the outputs from those spreadsheets back into the organization. So you've got to work really closely with those business partners to almost look over their shoulder to see what they're doing, so that you can actually build within the medallion layer what they're doing inside of their heads and the decisions that they're making to really drive those data sets into the right format for everybody to use and share.
That is interesting. If I may add, and I'm sure you've seen this over and over in your vast expertise, strategy always would lie into three segments per se. I would always put my strategy with people, process, and technology.
Mm-hmm.
And then I every time I actually go consult with enterprises, or in my good gig in the fintech at Equifax, I've always kind of looked at strategy at these three pieces of people, process, and technology, in the sense like how equipped or skilled are your people. And you can base your tooling decisions, you can base your enterprise forward decision based on the strength of your people, or you can be very honest, have a very honest conversation and say that our people's skills are not at a place where we aspire it to be, and you can upskill them. The whole aspect of actually looking at strategy from that perspective, I feel, is fairly critical, especially because we keep saying this at enterprise all the time. It's really the culture and the people which lag the technology itself. And then for me, it's really the whole aspect of setting in strategy for an enterprise is about looking at the process, and of course technology is going to follow up. But like what Agile really kind of coaches and says, it's always people over process, and then it's not like every process will fit for every enterprise, but what really fits for your enterprise. May it be that small, medium, or large enterprise that you're talking about, and how you can actually go get those low-hanging fruits with very minimum guardrails, and then kind of show success, and then probably expand it to your enterprise. And the whole aspect of and thanks for being flexible to touch on those aspects of how technology and really be able to we talked about it quite a bit outside of this podcast as well, where we talk about why don't we look at technology from all aspects or all pillars of your business. Would you want to touch a little bit more about how we look at technology from those aspects of
kind of talking about a maturity again, going back into the maturity model. So change, you touched on a number of key points there. Change management is absolutely vital. That maturity itself, where you do that maturity assessment, and there's a lot of frameworks out there that you can just leverage to do self-assessments. So you go different parts of the organization and you do this assessment, because a maturity model for one part of the organization might not be as advanced as a different part of the organization. So you really have to do that, organization, vertical by vertical across the different departments, and then you can start to build a roadmap for them to get them to the next level of maturity. And you'll have steps in each phase of that maturity level. And when you start off, normally you'll go into an organization, they'll be at the experimental phase, which includes things like, pockets of information that are distributed widely. You've got individuals that are using spreadsheets and R code and some Python, trying to get into the machine learning itself, but there's no governance in place. There's no frameworks. There's no support for these individuals. You'll end up with lots of different tools happening in these different pockets or in these skunk work areas where they're being given a mandate to do a job, but they're not giving the technology and the support from technology to do the right thing. The next level is really moving that to operational. And again, you've got to take a look at each department as an individual, and everyone's going to be on their own journey, and not everybody's going to get to the fifth stage of maturity. But the organizational is when you start to bring in that governance, you start to centralize that data, you start to share data sets from a single source. The analytics layer starts to become widely adopted across the organization, and ideally you need to get all departments that are using data at least to that operational level as early in the process as you can. The next level is really about the strategic aspects, and that level is where the governance framework's fully up and operational, the guardrails are in place. Every use case that's coming in has to be a strategic unlock. You know, it has to do something for it. You want to stay away from those distractors and those temptations that are happening. And you talked a little bit about low-hanging fruit, and it's always good to, you know, bring some of those things in. But at the end of the day, you know, we've got so much investment that we want to put in place, and so making sure you're spending those dollars in a very wise way. At the end of the day, I've got to answer to the chief financial officer who's looking at the KPIs associated with saying, hey, we were going to save this much money if we could improve this process. How about measuring that? And that's where that layer comes in, or that maturity model comes in, and gives you the capabilities to measure everything, and the tooling that's going to allow you to do that, so that you're not coming to the end of a quarter and you're saying, I've got to pull all this information together. The last phase is really about being transformational, right? And this is where most of the organization is now coming on board, utilizing the same tools. We've put in the training and the upskilling that needs to be in place, the change management. So when those particular use cases come out, are they being adopted by the people that need to be adopting them? Are the right decisions happening? And you've got a very, very strong governance framework happening in production that's monitoring the models as new data sets come in. It's flagging, it's giving you the information where stuff's starting to drift. So, you know, a lot of parts of the organization, or a lot of C-levels, think that once it's in production, it's good to go, but they don't understand that there's also monitoring and re-engineering that needs to go on as stuff starts to change, and those things have to be monitored. So those are really the 4 stages of maturity that you've got to be worried about, and trying to get each department on their different journey, and some departments might get there faster than others.
No, this is brilliant, and it's got a lot of information packed for our audience. So I'm going to quickly talk to the audience in the sense, like really, it's not the rose-tinted glasses that you want to look at any AI ML, right? You know, just like everything, AI ML monetization or even data build has always to be seen from a lens of ROI, which Nevarda so beautifully said, right? Always tie what is the ROI which your use case or your drive for data or AI ML is really driving. Enterprise transformation is going to come in small steps. Start with those baby steps, which is get those quick and small wins, which can then be percolated across your organization. And this is what we evangelize all the time here at Charter as well, which is we work with our customers and clients to see what is it that we can drive, what is the ROI that we can drive to them quickly without large changes. But then once those small changes are driven, maybe in the world of data or AI ML, like Nevarda is talking about here, that is very easily percolated to the rest of the organization, because success really kind of helps percolate those right things and right principles, may it be the data siloing, normalization, or the data science use cases that we're talking about across the organization. So all great practices, and wanted to really share that with all of you. Thanks for sharing such amazing information. But what role do you think as C-level executives that we would have to play within an enterprise? You know what? I've always firmly believed in this fact that principles, practices, maybe process always trickles top down. It is really what is it that you are practicing is what you can preach. Personally, I have actually seen this, that by me putting in some processes and principles, either at my services gigs here at Charter or my product gigs at Equifax, that has percolated a lot more faster down the hierarchy. So would love to hear from your perspective, what are some of the C-level people can do, should do versus should not do when it comes to AI absorption?
Yeah, so you talked about some of those quick wins. So early on the maturity level, you want to be making sure that those things are getting shared with the rest of the organization. So I think the first thing that the C levels need to be is part of those demos and then celebrating those wins, right? And that gets everybody started on that journey. But if we take the CEO as the starting point, they're ultimately responsible for everything that the company does. So they have to support the strategic initiatives and also the direction that's going on in the data and the AI space. And so they're going to support whatever frameworks that you put in place, the governance that's in place, ethical considerations, legal considerations, and they want to be a champion of that, right? And those individuals in that C role have to play a very tightly coupled with the strategies and the execution that's going on at the line level and celebrating those wins. The chief financial officer, he's got the purse strings or she's got the purse strings. So when we bring a use case forward, we've got to look at the ROI, but then also look at how we're going to measure that, right? It's one thing to do an assessment up front and say, we save, X number of dollars, or we're going to do something with our customer faster and shorten timelines between, responses or whatever it is that we're trying to deliver to them. But, when we get to production, are you still measuring that stuff and then providing those quarterly updates to the CFO saying, hey, we were going to save $500,000 here. It turns out we were only $250,000, or we did even better. Maybe it was $1 million saved, or maybe it was more customers that were coming on and buying your product because, you put this particular thing in. I think that the chief security officer's got to be actively involved as well. Ultimately, they're responsible for making sure, especially in our environment, that we're HIPAA compliant. Often you'll see ethical considerations come in there as well. They're part of that ethics committee, and they're driving our direction to make sure that we're not, implementing bias and security vulnerabilities. Architectural group has to make sure that the technology is structured in such a way that we're not introducing any further vulnerabilities, and the chief security officer is going to be actively important in writing those policies and those procedures and driving those documents out to those people that are working on these data sets so they understand exactly what's going on there. Our chief HR officer, as more AI comes into that space, are we making the right decisions coming out of these tools? Are there biases in these tools? Are they steering us? You think if you put a job description out there and you get 1,000 resumes and you run it through an AI, how many good people did you lose because a human didn't take a look at it? So what are the decisions from a human in the loop and a HR perspective, and with the other C levels as well? I think, your chief AI officer has to be actively involved in building those policies and procedures to make sure that, because they're going to have the best understanding, or the chief data officer is going to have the best understanding about how that data needs to be used, the ethical, the legal, from a governmental perspective in regulatory, how that's getting involved and making sure those policies are in play. And I think the last one's really your chief legal officer. If your organization has those, they need to understand what's going on in the market from the policies and the procedures that are implemented as state laws and federal laws, and they've got to be actively involved in making sure that they're getting that information to us. Specifically with AI, the need for human in the loops, at the helm, are very, very important. I'll give you an example from the insurance industry.
Yeah.
There's laws that are being written up at the state level, and it depends on what state you're in as to whether those laws are going through or they're currently in review. But in insurance, you can't automatically deny a claim through AI. So if you were building a workflow that was taking a policy document and a claim and then trying to marry it back to where the policy covered that particular claim, and you wanted to reject it, you've got to streamline that and push that to a human to do the final review. Whereas if you say you bring it in and it has a clear indication that you are covered, that's allowed to flow through the system automatically without a human in the loop saying, yes, this is covered. It's covered by this part of the policy. And there's hundreds of laws being created today that are not only at the state level, but even going to the federal government level. The Big Beautiful Bill had aspects of, no regulation on AI for the next 10 years. That didn't pass, but, it would have opened up the gates to do anything in that space. And so, I'm happy that at least we've got some people taking a look at it and making sure that we're making the right decisions and we're putting in AI that's responsibly designed and ethically framed.
That is very interesting. And you've touched on a bunch of things. You've touched on ethics and AI, which I think is very, very important. You're right. Whatever was put in the big bill didn't go in, which is good. But at the same time, very recently, I think a couple months back, there was a bill which was passed in Italy, in some part of Europe, where they made it very, very stringent as to the age group of people who can access these AI tools. I think the last that I read about it was 18 years and old, and you have to really authenticate and make sure. So I'm glad people are looking at ethics and what are some of the things that we can put in as to those bills coming around. But you also touched on how each of these personas at the C-level should be responsible for some of the things that we can or we can do, and how they personally have to hold accountable. I think this has come to my experience as well here, even at Charter, even at Equifax, as we were putting these processes together, as we were actually picking tooling for even development. We always looked from the lens of security or from the lens of IP, from the lens of compliance, to see and stand behind some of these tools that we are actually picking and be very cognitive about these tools that we're picking. And you touched on something very interesting, right? Stand by the tools and what you're using, and also celebrate those small wins. Yep. It's so funny, right? I keep sharing this all the time. With the advent of Gen AI specifically, what I have seen is some of my product managers have become phenomenal. I wouldn't say have become really, really handy at delivering POCs and at delivering prototypes, which is so amazing. Like, it has empowered things like vibe coding and whatnot, like, where you literally have an idea and you can actually go in and really vibe code so that you can actually show your prototype, show a running product. I think that as Gen AI has really kind of leveled the playing ground. You have a great idea, you are an SME at something. I think it's really nurturing those thought leaders. I think it's really asking all of us to be those end-to-end vision and thought leaders. I almost feel like gone are the days where someone is not equipped to put a good prototype out there. All that you got to know is know how to vibe code and have your idea and kind of show it as a prototype. We at Charter actually work with a lot of our clients, and some of our clients are like, oh my God, how did you so quickly come up with a prototype? Like literally what I had in my mind, you kind of put it out on practical, and I call that vibe coding, right? Yep. There's no secret. So I think AI at many levels have kind of got that bridge over. No, thanks for touching on all the personas of the C-level and how it's very important. It doesn't matter you're a CFO, it doesn't matter you're a chief AI officer. I think my big take home from what Nevarda was just talking about is, as a C-level team, how all of you can be aligned towards one goal. And in each of your roles, like what Nevarda was talking about, may you be the chief HR officer, may you be the chief AI officer or the finance officer, are the dots kind of coming together and this information is widely available. So and then that really drives your business towards a common goal, and achieving the ROI for your business becomes so much more faster, and you can use it more intelligently. This is phenomenal. Thanks for touching on all of those aspects of ethics and data and AI, and how you can look about and bring the change within your enterprise. But help me understand, in your mind, how would you inspire? Forget about the C levels, there's only so much. How do you inspire all your persona within your enterprise, made all the way from an engineer, like I said, to a product owner or manager? How do you inspire them to bring in these tools of Gen AI or AI into their lives, into their personas, and be more productive? How do you do that?
Yeah, so I establish, you start off with community of practice where you can share those ideas and bring those forwards. And once you start to evolve from a maturity perspective, you start to bring in a center of excellence. And I think the difference between a community of practice of sharing ideas and a center of excellence, the center of excellence becomes the place that is responsible for the tools that are coming in. That means we've done the right analysis on those tool sets, making sure that we've done, whoever the vendor is that's providing those, they're going to be around in 6 months, that they've got a solid base, they're making money, and we can continue to use those tools. A lot of developers want to bring in a bunch of different open source tools, but we have to vet those tools to make sure that they're not introducing security vulnerabilities in highly regulatory environments. We've got HIPAA compliance, PHI, financials have got all sorts of rules around what they can and they can't do in those spaces. So, your center of excellence becomes this think tank of taking a look at all these tools, maybe some of the ones that they've done POCs on, and then making sure that they're applying the assessments that are needed and then standardizing them. The problem we've got right now is every week a new tool comes out. Every week the decision you made a month ago seems obsolete. So handling, having a structured process for intake evaluation is so important in that area. And then, seeing it through to the end. So if you've picked a tool set, know that it's going to change a week, 2 weeks, a month, 6 months from now. And the decision that you made a few weeks ago might look like the wrong decision now, but you don't want to get into that situation where, we were on this tool, now we need to migrate to another tool, now we need to migrate to another tool. See everything through to the end, get it into production, and then reevaluate what it is in the market. You don't want to end up becoming an organization with 170 different vendors, put parts of money off everywhere else. If you can partner with somebody like yourselves, then, utilizing the frameworks that you guys are building, utilizing the tools that you're building kind of isolates an organization from, all the challenges of these small back end changes that need to happen.
That is very, very informative. That's very interesting. But that almost provoked a thought in me. You talked about how to really get these intake. Big advocate of actually having this process, especially. But sometimes it almost sounds like an innovation killer. Like, sometimes you could just have this idea from anywhere. How do you kind of balance between innovation and really getting through this process? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I run a lot of workshops, and that's where those incubation of those ideas happen. And like you said, with the tools you've got right now, we've got individuals that are scribing stuff and they're putting it into the tools. So at the end of those workshops, you can have these prototypes for that discussion. And those don't necessarily need to be, week-long events. These are the types of things you can do in one day. So allowing that innovation to come in through those group workshops is where you're going to start to see those values. Technology aside, with that prototype in front of somebody, then we can go off and make the right decisions from a technology perspective after the fact. Code generation is huge right now. There's a lot of releases coming out on the different platforms, a lot of open source capabilities that you can spin up very, very quickly, and identifying individuals that you've got on your development teams who, yes, they're core developers at the heart, but they, at the end of the day, they get their excitement from actually delivering product and helping them use the tools. to be able to speed that development cycle up so that they can actually get more out of the back door. Now, again, from a workshop prototype perspective, there's a few hops and jumps to get that production ready, but a lot of the code generation will get you over that, especially if you've built frameworks around the aspects of ethical, legal, and compliance, and you put those into the stack itself. Then all of that work kind of goes away, and it becomes a prompt engineering experience for the developer, who now is a systems thinker. How is this all coming together? How do I describe that to the tool to build that code generation layer?
That is so beautifully described. Exactly to do that, and that's here at Charter we have launched Orcaworks.ai. Orcaworks.ai exactly does that. It actually is a beautiful framework which is put together to actually take care of your agentic compliance security features so that you don't have to worry about them, so that your engineers can become exactly what Nevarda is talking about, that your engineers can become system engineers, system designers, there where they can think about end to end, and then engineering becomes very easy on Orcaworks.ai. And you could actually start helping build enterprise level AI use cases. You can build your digital companions on Orcaworks.ai. We have been really thrilled about the success what Orca has brought in, and really looking forward to help more enterprises on that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited. This has been a fun last few minutes for me, and how you've described all about data and AI. With that said, I want to gear our next segment to a little bit more, I wouldn't say nerdy, but people who are more keen about some more pro questions and how do they go about data and tooling and stuff like that. You ready, Nevarda?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, fantastic. With that said, very curious, right? If you were given a blank check, and if you were to basically write any number that you want there on the blank check and take it to your CTO, what would be that one thing that you would actually spend on to become yourself data ready, future ready, AI ready? What would that strategy be?
Yeah, I think having resources is important. Technology, we can always implement the technology, but getting the right resources. So I would spend all of that money, if not most of that money, on picking the right resources and getting that talent into the organization to be able to drive these initiatives forward. Those are not only people with the technical skills that are needed, because they can upskill across different platforms. You can take a Databricks person and give them a little bit of training, and they can be up on Snowflake in very short order. Obviously, we've got capabilities with AI now to take one programming language and shift it to another programming language with minor lift, if not 100% transformation with hands-off approach, right? So, the technology is really not that area. What we want are those people that think a little bit differently from just receiving those tasks. Okay, do this next, do this next, do this next. From the resource perspective, making sure that they're thought leaders, they can start to think from end to end about a product or a use case that they want to implement. And we need to move away from this story-driven approach to a vision and a mission for a use case, and allowing those people to fully explore it and run with it, so that we don't have to have this very heavy project management oversight on it. That's how we're going to get things to production quickly. And again, as long as you've got governance and ethical and legal frameworks around these things and the boundaries that they can work in, they're able to produce so much more value to the organization than just hiring an individual that does one job.
That is so brilliantly said. It's so funny. We talked about, this is what we both kind of found common grounds when we started. I know that you work with a lot of young engineers from Georgia Tech, Georgia State, KSU. I work with a lot of them, and this is what I tell my young engineering team. I always say, gone are the days when you can be siloed. The whole aspect is to really have, like we were talking about earlier as well, the whole vision, the whole aspect as to why you're building, what you're building, and how can you bring the system together. And I think you're touching on that theme one more time here. And so brilliantly said, that's where you want to invest. You want to invest in those people who can really understand the system design, what we call a system design, and put that together instead of just focusing on those silos. It's a reiteration of the conversation that I have with my engineering teams. I almost on an everyday basis have this conversation with my engineering teams. I literally kind of tell them here, especially after taking this role at Charter, I'm like, we want to build these. I think I really have this whole aspect of this is the time of build versus buy. This is the time just a handful of amazing engineers can build some really, really amazing products. And really excited to actually live through some of those ages and leading these engineering teams. And thanks for reiterating that whole aspect. And that is where you're going to actually put that blank check.
Yeah.
So, all right. So for all of you who are actually getting trained on AI ML, that's your thought process. That's how you're basically getting trained. Like, it's really the big picture which really matters. It's not those silos anymore. So yeah, thanks for that advice. With that said, right, data lineage, really loaded word, but actually I'll simplify it for our audience a little bit here. All that it is you knowing the roots of your data, right? You knowing where your data has come from, right? And why is this so important for some of our data nerds out there?
Yeah, so data lineage is probably one of the most important, even though it's a subset of the governance that needs to go in place. I think making sure that you've got data lineage, especially in regulatory environments, being able to provide that traceability, how those decisions are being made, monitoring that stuff through the pipeline is important. It builds trust. If the data sets are being transformed in the right way and available to different parts of the organization, you're going to get business leaders starting to trust the data sets, the reports that get driven from there, and also the decisions that the organization is making from that information that's coming in is very, very important. I think making sure that you've got that data quality inside of the lineage as well. So you're measuring that stuff and making sure that the quality, the rules that are standardizing the quality of the data that's coming in, or the transformations and everything like that. Again, explainability of that data set. Audits. If you get an audit, they're going to ask you how you made a decision from a model. You've got to be able to trace that all the way back through to the raw data sets, and even beyond that raw data set at the bronze layer, going out and where did you source this data from in the first place. You've got to have that full traceability, and data lineage and the tools, the governance tools that are associated with that allow that to happen automatically. I think scalable data is important as well. If you don't have good lineage in place and you don't have good explainability in place, how do you scale? That becomes a real challenge. And then I think the last is making sure that the AI layers that are going to start digesting this data, making sure that as your AI is building, outputs, and those outputs are being used for those business decisions, being able to explain those, because as soon as something becomes a black box and you don't understand how you got to this decision, that trust just erodes immediately.
Yeah, fantastic. Actually, it's so funny. At Equifax, when we were building this large data, like we had this large enterprise gig that was under progress, which is basically moving all of the consumer data from our legacy system to our modernized system. And you could just only imagine, like we have pretty much, Equifax has pretty much all of the consumer data. But to be able to actually see where we got the data from, because we had all kinds of data sources with us, but to be able to actually go back to the root of the data was so essential to bring data to the gold layer also. We really had to understand where did the data come from a lineage perspective, so that we could say, hey, when I'm purposing the data, is that the right data which I'm actually using? So very rightly said, we had to actually go through all of that when we lake housed the data at Equifax, and what an effort it was. It was effort to bring in all of the consumer data to one lake house, and to actually build purpose on top of that, may it be for your credit, may it be for your identity or fraud. Just really understanding that. And I think the other aspect that you talked about, which is why lineage and knowing where the lineage of the data also becomes an inherent part of when you audit.
Yep.
when you actually put governance, they're so kind of intertwined, and people look at it one or the other, but the concepts are so interrelated, and then governance and audit become so much more easier when you actually can track the path of it. And again, at that point, once you understand the concept of it, you could always go and pick the tooling which is more relevant to your enterprise. Tooling, in my mind, is always something that comes later, right? But now that we are anyways talking about tooling, what are your thoughts on tooling? How do you look at your use cases before you pick something, and how do you go about tooling? There is so many different shiny objects in the market.
Yep.
How do you do that? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I have a very robust framework that we follow to select the actual tooling, and it actually starts before we even consider any of the technology, the frameworks, the tools that are available in the marketplace. We always start at the use case level, and we've bundled a big backlog of use cases. So we're not only looking at an individual use case, we're identifying the functionality that's needed in each use case, and then we're taking a broad stroke across all of the use cases, bringing all those feature sets that are being requested in, going through those workshops and experiencing, where there's overlaps between these things, and then really understanding what it is that we're trying to achieve. What is future production going to look like? What is the end goal of those things that we want to put in production, and really understanding those strategic unlocks that these things are going to provide. Once we have all that together, we then go and do market scan with Gartner to identify the tools that are meeting the needs. We create a heat map to compare tools against tools. We may, if there's no clear leader, we may pick one or two of those tools and run a quick POC on those tools. We're taking a look at, especially today, in those new tools that are coming in. We've gone through a data modernization, and we went through this methodology to identify the tools that we landed on, making sure that they're going to support the governance framework. That's going to be automated. That's not manual. The last thing you want to do is come up to the quarterly report and then spend 2 days building that report. You want those things to come out of those tools automatically. They've got to have interoperability built into them. They've got to be cloud ready. Depending on the cloud service you're on, they've got to run on that cloud service. You're going to make a decision for SaaS directly with the vendor, or do you want to run that thing on your own cloud? So you got to take all those aspects into it. Supportability. What is, if you're talking about something that's a little more technical, what are the skill sets in the market that are going to be able to implement this? There's in the data space, let's say a new tool comes out that's, blasting away their competitors with features and functionality, but none of those features or functionality is anything that you really need. Why would you select that? And then the upskilling that's going to need to switch over to those tools, and the transformation of the data sets that need to go into those tools. So these are all aspects that are outlined in the assessment framework that we go through. We do those checks and balances, and it might end up with a POC at the end to select the right tool for the purpose.
Well, thanks for sharing all of this. This is so close to my heart. And at Charter, every time at Charter Global, every time I have a conversation, I have these first conversations with my customers on the discovery phase. This is exactly what I evangelize, and this is what it could be my data team or my digital transformation team. The fact that you can be tool agnostic and don't be tool bound, but really look at your people, your process, and where you want to go to. I always call it, can I really list out my business cases? Can I list out what is the ROI for my business cases? And what is it that my customer wants to achieve on that business case? That's the first place where we could actually start from and kind of rank that. And then from there, look at what is the people strength, or what is my engineering strength. Are my engineer, I'll give a quick example. If my engineers are from the traditional SQL background, then can I pick something like DBT for transformation, because I've got a more SQL embedded workforce, right? You can then look at your people to actually see, okay, what are some of the tools which would actually make sense for my organization to actually achieve this business case. And the whole aspect that you put in is something that's very dear to me, and we really evangelize here this at Charter Global, and how we go about with it, which is look at all of the pillars that you want to go hit, which is the first pillar being, like I said, the ROI of a business case, and then how does your security posture look like, how does your compliance posture look like, and how does your cost posture look like. You want to be very, very mindful of like, if this is what is the ROI that your business case is actually driving, you want to be very mindful of what is the cost, which is probably, I have seen use cases where people just throw out Snowflake, but Snowflake could be a little bit more expensive than something else. Again, we don't want to get into the rabbit holes of tooling and whatnot. I guess the point is, be very, very vigilant of all of these aspects where you could actually put your tools and really have a framework. We at Charter have this amazing framework, which we really point. We weight your organization on all these pillars, and we put points. And then, like you said, we basically measure which tool comes out top. And sometimes one tool is almost equal to other. And then you look at your people and process and see which is closer to you. And this is what I always say. You can always make that very engineering-driven decision on tooling. But once you understand your overall aspiration and goal, once you understand your enterprise better, then I think you can draw better choices on tooling.
Absolutely.
No, phenomenal. Thank you so much for actually putting all that. This was brilliant. I think putting all of this into perspective, I've gained quite a bit, and it's been fun chatting with you. But now I'm going to actually go to some really, really fun segment. How about some rapid fire questions to you, Nevarda? Are you ready for that?
I'm ready.
All right, here you go. I'm going to read out of my queue. And I've got about 10 questions. We can go with these 10 questions, and we'll keep it to a word or two.
Okay.
What's the most surprising thing business leaders misunderstand about AI?
AI can do everything, and it's really easy to implement. I think the aspects of governance, guardrails, controls from a legal aspect, data readiness, those things all have to be considered. It's not just dropping in an AI tool.
There's no right or wrong, so I'm keep going. So data lineage or governance, which one do you think most of the companies ignore the most?
I think the governance aspects of it, because it comes in over the top after you've already put all the bad procedures in place.
Okay, here's a fun one for you, okay? What's the most overhyped phrase in the data world today, according to you?
AI is going to overtake my job, but the reality is somebody using AI is.
That's interesting. Okay, with that, what's your everyday AI app that you can't live without?
I think from a business perspective, Data IQ is really the number one tool that we're utilizing right now, because it enables, under the guidance of a data scientist, the ability for the business to be building their own stuff.
Interesting. Here's a very interesting one. I'm very curious. If AI were a person, what kind of personality would it have?
Helpful, supportive, a place in crisis.
Interesting. Very interesting. I think you kind of answered it, but I'm going to ask this. One myth about AI you would love to bust once and for all.
Yeah, I think it goes back again to the AI is going to replace my job.
That's interesting. That's true. It's really the people who know AI which is going.
Exactly.
This is interesting. What's the funniest or the most unexpected way you've seen AI used? Anything?
Yeah, I think recipe generation, chocolate chicken, cheesecake with gherkins.
Interesting. All right. Yeah. If data were food, what do you think it would be?
Very spicy Mexican dish.
Oh my God, you are a data evangelist. This question was asked to me and I said something very bland.
Yeah.
Because I come from such an application product space.
Yes.
But yeah, without data, there's nothing. So I totally see the space that you're coming from. One last one for you. And this is, if you could give AI one superpower, what would it be?
It would replace me on meetings, answer as me, so that I can go and do the cool stuff, actually delivering product.
That is interesting. Don't blame you for that. I think my team wanted to put me on spot here, so they have added one interesting question, and the question is: do you have a question that you'd like to ask
I
me?
do. What do you think the biggest mind shift for leaders in data and AI space need to be thinking about?
That is, I feel the biggest mind shift that leaders would have to have in data and AI is build fast and fail fast. Gone are the days when you have a concept that you actually can bring out to the real world at a, I'm not even talking about 2 or 3 quarters. I'm talking about in a couple quarters. The biggest shift for me is, like I said earlier, I really believe that we are at a place where you can build amazing things right now. So to really bring vision and concepts out to the market faster, and to have the audacity to actually bring it, I think that has to be the shift, according to me.
And it makes it exciting as well.
It definitely makes it
Awesome.
exciting. All of us are on that journey to bring fun things out to the market. No, this has been a brilliant session. Thanks for spending time with us and really explaining those complex topics about data. How do you prepare your data for AI ML use cases, and really breaking down those concepts into something simpler and letting our audience understand. And for audience, I hope you all had an amazing time, and I hope you all took back home all these complex concepts of data. How do you really transform your data? How do you get your data ready for your data science use cases? How do you look at strategy from an enterprise level? If you want to learn more on these concepts, and you definitely want to stay tuned to our next episode of the Data Shift, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And till the next episode, stay inspired and stay data driven. Thank you, and this is your host Rajesh Indurti.